And we are now recording, so I can say again, welcome. Thanks for joining Green and Healthy Homes Initiative today. This is the fourth and final installment of our webinar series on whole house repair programs, incorporating electrification measures. I'm Catherine Lee, Director of Client Services at Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, and I'm very grateful to be joined by my colleague, Abby Koch, who is the community engagement organizer in our Baltimore office. So I'm going to go ahead and share our presentation as people are joining in. Let's see if I can share my screen, share the slides. And Abby, I will start us off, and then you can just let me know when to advance the slides that you're speaking through. All right, and just to give a little bit of background on GHHI and who we are, if this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is committed to addressing the social determinants of health and the advancement of racial and health equity through the creation of healthy, safe, and energy efficient homes. Our flagship location is in Baltimore, but we are the largest national nonprofit organization focused on healthy housing programming in the country. We do work related to services that we'll be discussing today that with a goal of eradicating the negative health impacts of unhealthy housing and unjust policies for children, seniors, and families to ensure better health, economic, and social outcomes, especially in historically disadvantaged communities with an emphasis on communities of color. We designed this webinar series because we are advancing work in some of those place-based services. Abby's going to talk about our work in Baltimore. Previous sessions that we've hosted have been about our programs and services around whole house measures in Trenton, New Jersey, as well as some partner work.
Catherine, I'm not hearing you anymore. I don't know if it's just a me problem.
All right, I tried muting and unmuting. Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you for that, Abby. We also have a previous session that we presented with a focus on the Philadelphia. Oh, did I cut out? Or did Abby? Can I get an audience comment if my audio is working, please?
For the record, I'm hearing you now, but you might want to just start this slide from the beginning.
Okay, yeah, I saw your, okay. Yeah, I saw your audio cut out and I wasn't sure if that was you or me. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate that. We wanted to share that we have previous sessions with information about sort of programmatic case studies in Baltimore, Trenton, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. Our partners at Philadelphia Energy Authorities work on the Built to Last program. But we wanted to share this information with people who were interested in this topic, really to help support capacity building in nationally, but especially in the communities where we see work progressing, to help support the aligning, braiding, and coordinating of resources so we can scale these services and taking a holistic approach to housing repairs, which we think and are starting to get more evidence on that we're making an impact on improving access to decarbonization and electrification measures in low and moderate income occupied households. So throughout our series, we've talked about some best practices related to enabling policies that support this whole house approach, the partners and funding resources that are available in communities across the country for funding braiding. Also, things that we're learning on the ground, the work that we're doing to identify barriers to implementation, identifying strategies to eliminate those barriers, and also what we're learning through outcomes measurement and evaluation. And today we're going to have a focus on the work that we're doing related to community engagement and how that supports whole house programming really at every phase. So we're very excited to advance this conversation. I want to make sure that everyone has an understanding of what we mean by whole house model, and that is taking an approach to comprehensively improve residents' housing quality, increase energy efficiency, and ensure that homes with the highest needs are not left behind as we shift to carbon-free appliances, infrastructure, and related technologies. So we'll talk about sort of different programmatic elements. These are many of the things that we've covered throughout this series, but some of the things what we'll really focus on today are, again, the community engagement, um, work to support client intake, reaching people who have those needs, addressing things that may otherwise defer people from program participation, so all residents of communities have access to these resources for electrification, but all the things that need to go and be put in place in the scope of work that we're developing to make that happen. So again, today we're going to be talking about Baltimore and work that's going on in Maryland, but we have other examples that we featured throughout the series. And after we wrap up our webinars, we're going to be sharing a training guide that has some written detail on all of these programs. So you've got some text to refer to that will have some summaries of the things that we've discussed, as well as the recordings of the webinars. And just to give you an idea of sort of the history of how we came to this model, Green and Healthy Homes Initiative has been working to advance the align, braid, and coordinate model now really for over 2 decades, or almost 2 decades, I should say, that we really were very active in the 90s and early aughts in doing lead hazard reduction in the city of Baltimore. Found that there were other hazardous conditions and inefficiencies in the homes that our crews were going into that needed to be addressed. So looked at ways that we could pull together funding streams to take a more holistic approach to what we were doing. And we developed what we have referred to now for many years as the GHHI model, to pull together limited repair funding, limited repair programs with a set kind of smaller scale funding amount per unit, and make that work into providing the adequate resources that households need to provide a holistic interventions in their housing conditions. So the result is a healthy, safe, energy efficient, and now ideally carbon-free home. So we're going to talk about some of those elements as we go through today, but specific to electrification measures being incorporated into that model. In the city of Baltimore, we've been able to do what started as a pilot program in 2022 to do some electrification measures in homes that were going through our program services in Baltimore. So the households receive that comprehensive scope of work, including energy efficiency measures, any electrical upgrades and appliance replacement. And we have done some evaluation of those measures. And that is a program we have been able to expand upon over the last few years to, I think Colin told us last week, Abby, we've completed, I believe, 48 units, which is very exciting to hear those results. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby so we can start talking about community engagement and our Buildings Up project.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And just give me a 5-minute warning, when I'm coming up on my time. So if I need to speed through anything, I can. I'm going to try to give things the time it deserves.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about the Buildings Up project, what it is, and the community engagement that we've done around that as an example. Then I'm going to go into some general principles and then talk about how we're talking about home electrification to people. So the Buildings Upgrade Prize was given out through the U.S. Department of Energy, and Green and Healthy Homes was honored to be the lead applicant for the Baltimore team and one of 44 teams around the country who received the prize. So the idea is we would work with community-based partners in East Baltimore specifically, where our organization was founded and does a lot of work, although we do work other places as well. And try to build out this model for whole home with electrification for low-income homes, while making sure we were doing it in a really community-engaged way to design something that really worked for people. Next slide, please. So our partners include a number of community-based organizations that have been in the area for a long time. You see the East Baltimore Historical Library, Banner Neighborhoods, Men and Families Health Center, Rebuild Johnston Square, just real anchor institutions in sort of this one side of our town. We're also working with both city and state agencies that touch this work, and with several community-based workforce development partners. So we've got the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers local chapter there. They've got a vested interest in this work. And Living Classrooms and Project Jumpstart are both working with people, who have barriers to employment. And we want to start building electrification into more of what they do, so that there can be local hiring for these projects. Next slide, please. So the idea is we're trying to do really holistic upgrades, not just a stove or just heat pumps, but do as much as we can for every home that we're touching. As I said, we're hoping to build in workforce component where we're training and hiring local people, or maybe not us specifically, but the local contractors doing this work. We're focused mainly on single family homes and specifically row homes, as that's the dominant housing type.
Oh, sorry, everyone. It looks like Abby's internet connection may have cut out, so we'll give her a minute to rejoin. Apologies for the disruption.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I think I might be having an internet issue today, so hopefully that won't happen again. But yeah, Catherine, you can keep it moving if necessary. Okay, so the idea is to take our existing model, where we're looking at all sorts of different health and safety and efficiency issues in a home, and braid in everything we were just discussing. We're getting technical assistance from residential retrofits for energy equity, or R2E2. That's a national group that DOE has brought to us. And they've given us this really detailed critical success factor structure that we're working under, where we have to look at things like language access and how we're doing the community engagements. And also, are people actually going to save money on their energy bills? Is this an appropriate technology for these types of homes? It's really very comprehensive. And so the idea is that we'll end up with an equitable and scalable model for community-driven electrification. Next slide, please. I think that kind of touched on all that. Positive health outcomes is really what we're going for as an organization. And so we've gotten real deep into the indoor air quality issues around burning fossil fuels in your home, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. This is the area that we're working in. If you're familiar with Baltimore City, you'll have some sense of what this map is, with the Inner Harbor being there at the bottom left. But suffice to say, it's a dozen or so neighborhoods, and many of them, specifically the ones with the dotted lines around the red numbers there, are DOE designated Justice 40 census tracts. So that was part of how we determined sort of the boundaries for this project, was looking at where we could target the largest number of people with the greatest need. Next slide, please. So phase one was a concept phase, and that was when we were coming up with the idea for this. And at the end of coming up with the idea, then we submit and got the initial prize from DOE. And so the community engagement that we did around that was to start in spring 2023. Again, before we'd actually gotten the buildings upgrade prize, we didn't know for sure if we were going to be in this program, but we knew we were going to be doing this work. We partnered with Johns Hopkins School of Nursing and to have a graduate student help us put together a initial community advisory board. We recruited 14 residents of East Baltimore who met monthly for just a few months, really to learn about, discuss, and apply for home electrification services through our programs. We were able to give them pretty generous stipends for each meeting. And people were really interested, we found, in the health and economic benefits of electrification. and talked to us about how important it was to build trust with community, because people have been burned before by programs that weren't able to deliver what they promised. And we use that initial input to inform our submission to DOE. So some of the lessons learned there is that, it's not that people don't care about climate change, but when you're dealing with immediate health issues with asthma, COPD, et cetera, when you're trying to keep a roof over your head, those are people's key concerns, their health and finances. And we found out that we had blundered a little bit and that we'd spoken a little bit too positively about how we were going to do our best to get everybody electrified, because it turned out to be really hard. Of the 14 participants, only 3 of them actually were able to get electrification services from us. Some of them got other services. But yeah, for reasons including, in some cases, severe structural issues with the home, which were beyond the funding capacity that we had to deal with. In some cases, because people had accessed other housing services that used the same pots of funding that we did, which made them ineligible for us to use those pots of funding that we had intended to use with them for electrification. In some cases, people just had very new appliances and we couldn't justify replacing a 2-year-old furnace when we had other applicants out there, with no working heat, with a 30-year-old appliance. And in some cases, people didn't own their properties and weren't able to get permission from the owner or had other paperwork issues. And so I call that a blunder because some people were very frustrated about it. Some people were like, yeah, I understand you tried. But there were a few folks who really felt like, hey, you lied to us. And that's a terrible thing when when the most important thing is building trust with the community. So we're being real transparent going forward about the fact that we are going to try to do this for people, but it won't work out for every household. And I'll say one last piece that we learned is just it takes a long time for people who don't have a background in these issues to sort of come up to speed on it. And so it's worth taking the time to really carefully design a board like this and give it the space it needs to breathe. Next slide, please. So yeah, now we're in phase 2 of Buildings Up, the plan phase. And the idea is now we're putting together the actual plan with our community partners and with the new community advisory board that we put together, or that we're in the midst of putting together now. So we got our project partners together, all those community-based organizations that we were talking about, and did a couple of facilitated planning sessions with R2E2, where we co-developed what did we want out of a community advisory board. We came up with a mission and a vision and who we were going to target and how we were going to do the recruitment process. And a lot changed through the course of doing that from what our initial idea of how we would roll it out was. So we were calling it internally the Buildings Up Community Advisory Board, and our partners said loud and clear, projects come and go. This is meant to be a 5-year thing. Maybe the funding will run out before that, or 5 years will be over in a blink. We want this to be an electrification community advisory board generally, and not just for East Baltimore, where these arbitrary lines have been drawn. We want to look at all of Baltimore City. It's one city. The mission, beyond just advising our programs, became more about the members being ambassadors between electrification services and the community to foster that two-way communication and, certainly including GHHI services, but with the hope that that would include other nonprofit or government programs doing electrification. And whereas before we'd been looking at people who were interested in being program clients, and we're thinking maybe for this new iteration of the board, we would specifically recruit people who had all gotten electrification from us. Our partners said, now that gives you a really skewed view, right? That was a really good point. So we identified key groups we wanted to try to hit: immigrant communities, faith communities, youth, workforce program training participants. And really ended up with a serious plan that took a while to put together. So lots of thank you to R2E2 for all their support on that. They're a really good resource, and we're actually working with them now on the onboarding and orientation plan for the new board. With some of the prize money, we're supporting stipends for the new board members, $75 per 1 to 2 hour meetings. That's a a little lower than we'd done before, but is sort of a standard amount across the country. And we looked at what we would pay a consultant for their time. We wanted to make it serious, and equitable without having people just be in it for the money, basically. We also have set aside funds to, if we need it, be able to provide translation and interpretation, childcare on site at the meetings, support with transportation. We wanted to make sure that there were no artificial barriers limiting what voices we were hearing from. And so we put out that application. It's a very short online application, a few questions. Why do you want to be on the board? What other community activities are you involved in, et cetera? And shopped it around in East Baltimore specifically, although we were prepared to recruit from the whole of the city. And we received 20 applications. The goal is to have 11 to 15 people, definitely an odd number. So we're scheduling slightly longer interviews now, like 15 to 20 minutes, to ask people, like, how much time do you really have for this? And what topics are you most interested in? What networks, do you have? And then with those community partners who helped us come up with the plan originally, we're going to review all of that, look at a matrix of the groups we were trying to hit and see, did we hit those groups, and then make decisions. So the goal is to maybe have a first meeting as soon as late November or early December. And it's just been a much longer timeline than we initially anticipated, like a year from when we got the word that we were getting the Buildings Up prize. But it's been well worth it, I think, to spend that time. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to talk more generally about community engagement now. I was asked to put together some general principles to share with you all. And one thing that we found really works is going where people already are. We've tried holding our own meetings, and we can get some people out. We had one really good town hall, but people are very busy and they have their own stuff they're already doing. So why not go where they already are? Teachers love to have speakers come in and talk to their classes. Community association presidents love to have people come in and share information about resources and health-related issues. We've been to all sorts of back-to-school events in the past month or so, community health fairs, community health worker trainings. There is no lack of places to speak to large groups of people if you go where they already are. I already talked about the importance of being transparent and upfront about the fact that, like, hey, there's a number of eligibility requirements for this. The timeline, it's not going to be immediate. It could be months. There are some barriers that can come up through no fault of yours or ours where it turns out we won't be able to do it. And people trust you more when you're not acting like everything's going to be perfect and you're going to change their lives, because they know that's just not how the real world works. So you got to be real with people. Studies have shown that positive messaging is better. So instead of telling people, like, if you stay on gas, you'll be stuck in this like downward spiral where the costs will keep going up and you'll be really in trouble, talk about saving money. Just people tune out when you are scaring them. Appeal to people's self-interest. I talked about this before in terms of health and pocketbook issues. We're all operating out of our own self-interests at the end of the day. That's normal and valid. It's not that we don't talk about decarbonization and climate change and whatnot, but we start with the things that we know are most salient to most people. This is just a general principle of be humble. I've seen people come into communities and be like, we know everyone here is really suffering, and doesn't know how to get the things they need. Don't talk like that. Don't talk like we need to get everybody engaged in this climate fight. Why aren't you all engaged in the climate? Yeah. Be humble. Next slide, please. This is the last slide of bullet points, for the record, but I got a few more for you. Please don't use acronyms, or if you use them, immediately explain what they are. It's just crazy to me how difficult it is for people to wrap their head around the need to explain what they're talking about. And key concepts. So for example, if I'm talking about, well, this meta-analysis said blah, blah, blah about indoor air quality, I'll say, so I read a meta-analysis, a study of different studies, just in a couple of words to explain a term that might not be familiar to people. Respect people's time by not always just asking them to volunteer. If you're holding any kind of meeting, you should have some kind of snacks, really, but especially if you're holding an evening meeting, provide dinner. Just do that. And it may be appropriate to compensate people to come out for coming out to a single meeting where you're really asking them to give you their time and their personal, community-based expertise. But certainly if you're asking for an ongoing commitment, if you are asking people to volunteer their time, you're only going to get the people who are able to do that, right? Not the people who are like, I'm trying to hustle and keep my family fed and stuff. So no, I can't commit to doing all this free work for you. So it's not just an equity issue in terms of people should be paid for their time, but it also will really affect the outcomes of your community engagement effort. Don't take things personally. I worked in government for many years, so this was something I really had to internalize, and I would see so many of my colleagues like get defensive and offended when people were talking about problems that they had had with us. There's always going to be somebody, in any room of 10 people, one of them is going to have a problem with whatever something is. It's not about you. So do your best to reflect back what the person is saying, acknowledge, the valid parts of what they're saying. And don't be afraid to say, I'm so sorry, that went down that way for you. Yeah. Language access, we're finding that going into meetings of local Latino organizations, of which there's a large population in East Baltimore that we weren't really tapping into very much before, that people are really hungry for this information. They're like, oh yeah, tell us more. And often having a lot of trouble accessing safe, healthy, green, efficient housing conditions. So it's really important not to neglect that piece just because it takes some extra thought and steps. And I sort of belabored the point about giving the process time. People have seen, as I said, a lot of programs come and go over the years, and they need to trust you that you're worth their time to engage in. You're not going to be gone, in a couple more months and leave them hanging. So just understand it's going to take a while, and you might need to be following up with your partners with regular, calls or texts or whatnot to get them into what you're doing. And maybe at some point, they'll be really bought in, but they're probably not going to start there. Next slide, please. Okay. Breaking down electrification, what do we mean by that? How do we talk to people about that? The simplest language that we found to use is just we're replacing the things in our lives that run on fossil fuels. Sometimes I'll even take the time to explain, what do we mean by fossil fuels? Why would a fossil be a fuel? We're talking about the ancient remains of plants and animals, that we're burning and putting into the atmosphere. Again, I think a single sentence like that really makes it stick better for people. But anyway, we're talking about our stoves, our water heaters, our cars. This is one of the most important ways that we can take greenhouse gases out of our economy and stop, the worst effects of climate change. But it's also one of the most important ways we can be energy efficient, since the newest efficient electric appliances can be 2 to 4 times more efficient than the most efficient fossil fuel versions. And so people really get that. Oh, wow, that's quite a statistic, isn't it? Next slide. I'm going to talk about what we are sharing with people about the benefits and what messaging that we're finding people are responding to. Next slide, please. Health first and foremost, right? And when I talk about this piece, I get personal because people respond to that as well. You need to be authentic about who you are and where you're coming from. And so I explained, I grew up with gas, and my parents got an electric stove, and I was like, I would never do that. I would miss the little blue flames. Like, they're my friends. I love them. Because somehow, as an environmental professional, I never thought about the implications of burning fossil fuels under my nose multiple times a day. But when I took this job, I knew it was something I was going to be working on. I knew I had to convince myself before I could try to convince anybody else. So I read a bunch of studies, and I found this meta-analysis, this study of studies that averaged out a whole bunch of different research and found that children in a home with a gas stove have a 42% higher chance of having asthma than children in a home with an electric stove. And I was like, oh, good, I can stop reading studies now. And I just have to remember one statistic, because in Baltimore City, we have twice the rate of childhood asthma, twice plus, than the rest of the country. So this is immediately an incredibly salient bullet point. for the people that we're talking to. And then I take a moment to explain why would that be the case? Well, nitrogen dioxide is this chemical that's created when we burn these gases, this methane gas, and we're finding, and this is true, studies across the country, but also here in Maryland and Montgomery County. We're hoping to do some of this in Baltimore too, where people are testing inside people's kitchens while they're cooking. Sometimes they're finding multiple times the EPA's outdoor allowable limit for nitrogen dioxide, and there's no safe indoor limit. And people are also finding that many of these appliances are leaking small amounts of gas even when they're not in use, which is having a low level effect on people. Next slide, please. This is also about the health of our neighborhoods generally. We're finding that fossil fuel heating equipment in our buildings is responsible for a huge amount of the outdoor air pollution. You know, the stoves are sort of polluting the inside of our homes, but everything that vents to the outside, the dryers, the furnaces, the water heaters and whatnot, are putting those same chemicals into everybody's air. And so we got a few compelling stats there about that. We actually put out a report on this called Cutting the Smog, which you can find on our website on the publications page. Next slide, please. Health and safety. That's the main things that we focus on. So next we talk about safety. And I found some simple, compelling statistics about the number of people who are visiting the emergency room every year because of carbon monoxide poisoning, even losing their lives, all the gas explosions that are happening around the country. And I know I said not to scare people, but there's no way to talk about this like without saying these things, that maybe we don't need to be piping this dangerous explosive gas into our homes, to do the things we need to do. And electric induction stoves, of course, only heat magnetized materials like stainless steel and cast iron. Again, making sure I'm explaining what I'm talking about. So they don't burn you the same way an open flame would. And so they're much safer in that regard. And if I have the time, I'll tell a story that a coworker related to me about being up in the middle of the night, heating up a bottle for her baby and bumping into, the gas burner and turning it on slightly without realizing. And then her and her family having to run out of the home in the middle of the night, and the firefighters called and everything. Next slide, please. Finances. So we've done the work to find the research other people have done and be doing our own calculations. And yeah, the vast majority of people in our state will save money today by switching from gas to electricity if they're using new high quality energy efficient appliances. Electric resistance heating, the stoves with the metal coils are actually less efficient than most fossil fuel options. But with also weatherization, so that your heat and cooling isn't just immediately leaking out of your house. But if you do those basic things, which we always do when we're doing these projects, almost everybody is going to save money. And gas prices are projected to increase at a much faster rate than electricity prices in coming years. So we think those savings will only grow, right, is the positive way to put that. Next slide, please. Comfort. A lot of people in Baltimore City don't have central air. They're using the window units that sit in your window, and these new electric heat pumps can provide both heating and cooling and leave your windows free to be open or closed as you prefer. It's apparently a slightly different feel, electric heating and cooling, but more people than not say they actually prefer it. And in case you had heard that these heat pumps have struggle at low temperatures, the newest ones can operate at very, very low temperatures, and they're using them up in Maine, and they're doing just fine. So I make sure to mention that to people. Next slide. And now we're getting into maybe some of the more traditional environmentalist group talking points. But again, I'm starting with things that will be most personal and salient to people, imagine, changing their lives personally. And so energy independence, right? The idea that we don't need to be reliant on utilities. We don't need to necessarily even worry when the grid goes out if we can generate our own power. And again, transparency. Most Baltimore row homes are relatively small and have enough space with the current technology to meet a half to 3/4 of their energy needs with solar panels alone. And we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to put solar panels on anybody's given home. But we can't generate our own fossil fuels. We can generate our own electricity, and geothermal, reusing the gas pipes to pull heat up from the ground is a really exciting technology. And where we're beginning to see people do microgrid projects where whole blocks can be networked together and share power with each other. I usually also mention that an electric car can act as a big backup battery in case of an outage, because that's a big concern that people have, is like, if everything's electric and there's an outage, I will have no sources of power, versus if I still have some kind of fossil fuel thing, then I'll at least have that. Next page, please. And now I get into climate change, in a last but very much not least kind of way. So gas releases a methane, which is 80 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. We all talk about carbon dioxide because it lasts in the atmosphere much longer, but methane in the short term is an immediate, incredibly serious problem for the climate. And the short term is what matters right now. We need to switch to clean electricity in this decade to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And if we continue to burn fossil fuels for our energy needs on a large scale, it's not going to be a livable planet. And again, I'm not trying to scare people. We need to be real about that fact. Next slide, please. And of course, to bring it back to health, climate change is not just like, oh, sad, the polar bears. No, this is a human health issue. Talking about serious storms, extreme heat, serious air pollution, and could go on, higher pollen counts, that are causing people more allergies, greater prevalence of ticks, as it warms up in our particular environment. Next slide, please. I want to make sure that people are able to picture what we're talking about. Like, okay, that all sounds great, but what on earth would that look like in my home? And what would the process be like? If it's sort of a big mystery box, then people are much more hesitant to, start to engage with it. So I explain our intake process, how we determine eligibility, that we have somebody come out and do an assessment of all the potential issues in the home. Is it a good candidate for electrification? And then, we take that back, and there's a process that can take, a month or more. Again, trying to be transparent about timelines where, we're doing stuff on the back end, and show people that there really are a lot of steps that we've got to go through. We're not just making them wait because we don't care. Next slide, please. And then we'll work with the homeowner to schedule contractors to come out at a time that's convenient to them. Health and safety issues get addressed first. And then we are, for every project that we do of this kind, making sure to upgrade the electrical panel, the breaker box, to make sure that it can handle having a higher electric load. Even if the appliances that are in the home now wouldn't overwhelm it, we want people to be able to add capacity in the future to have a charger for an electric car, for example. Then new special outlets, like an electric dryer needs a special kind of outlet, get installed. And at the very, very end, then we swap out the appliances once everything's ready, so there's as little disruption for people as possible. And then they can start using them at that time, but there is one final step that happens, and that's the utility coming out and saying, yep, that's all okay. So that's how we talk about the electrification process. Next slide, please. And I feel like I'm really belaboring this point, but I've just heard so many people say, I wasn't able to get services and I don't understand why. And they're frustrated about it. And word of mouth is so important. Trust building is so important. We're trying to eliminate as much of that confusion as possible. And explaining to people, we don't do big multifamily housing types. We, look at the household income. That's the threshold eligibility criteria. We need the owner to approve. You need to be able to provide us certain paperwork. And so I'm showing people there what that paperwork is. And I'll explain, like, for example, if you're the homeowner, but the deed is in the mortgage, it's in your, deceased relative's name, then you're going to have to do some work on your own, that we can give you some guidance on. But to correct that before we will be able to work on your home. We have additional funds available for seniors. So sometimes we're able to do projects for people based on age. We have additional funds available for homes with a child with asthma or with elevated blood levels. So even though that doesn't seem to have anything to do with electrification, that could impact the projects that we're able to do or not do. The condition of the home, if there's standing water in the basement and an enormous crack in the foundation, we can't go down there and do that work because we don't have the money to fix that. And we can refer people to other programs that might be able to help. I talked about age of the appliances, so sort of the opposite situation. If things are too new and too nice, we just can't prioritize replacing them. And grant money goes up and down over time. We try and maintain as steady a level of services as possible, but sometimes we got to say to people, hey, we're waiting for something to come in. We'll get back to you when we can. We don't know exactly when that's going to be. But I emphasize that all of our programs are free. There's no charge to apply. We don't do any kind of loan or cost sharing. We never charge people anything. So there is no reason not to find out if you would qualify for these services. Next slide, please. Sharing community success stories is really important. The very best experiences that I've had talking to community associations is when I've been invited by somebody who got our services and was like, I need to tell my neighbors about this. But we do have a couple of sort of like classic example people who have kindly allowed us to share their stories who we talk about. So this is Miss Billups. She's a retired state employee. Her home was in really rough condition. She didn't even feel comfortable having her grandchild in her home. Her gas boiler wasn't working. Her gas stove had no venting to the outside. There were multiple leaks throughout the home, inadequate insulation. So, it was too cold when it was in the winter and too hot in the summer, and multiple trip and fall hazards. And so we were able to come in and correct all those things on that list, get her a new heat pump and mini splits for AC, replace the gas stove with a new electric one, replace the washer and dryer. And again, combined with the weatherization and other energy efficiency measures, her utility bills dropped $100 in the first month after the interventions, and her indoor air quality improved, and she was now comfortable having her grandchild over. So she's a wonderful person to come out and share that story with people. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, sort of an overarching view about equitable program implementation. What do we mean by equitable program implementation? Programs are often not reaching the households with the greatest need. People aren't hearing about it. They have these paperwork barriers. They don't trust, what you're offering because they've been burned before. They are getting deferred from programs because their homes have other problems along the line I was talking about. And if we're not reaching the people who most need what we're offering, then what are we even doing here? Catherine talked about braiding services to address issues holistically. My understanding is that we even got into energy efficiency in the first place because of lead. In as much as people were getting deferred from energy efficiency programs that they should have been eligible for because of the presence of lead paint in their home. Like, if we bust through this wall to put in more insulation, and we'll cause a cloud of lead dust, so we can't do that. And we said, well, we have the lead money, give us the energy money too, I guess. Partnering with other service providers for referrals back and forth to make sure that people aren't just left hanging to then figure out, okay, which of these other 12 programs that appear to be out here should I try next? Building awareness and trust in the community, offering support with navigating these paperwork issues or, all sorts of systems. I want to see us get to the point where we're helping people walk through the process to get all kinds of tax credits and rebates and whatnot that they're eligible for. Because all this stuff is very intimidating. I've never gotten a tax credit. No, thank you, paperwork. So of course we need to reduce those paperwork burdens as much as possible. Categorical eligibility is a term that means like, okay, if you're getting, say, food stamps, then we're just going to assume you're also eligible for these other income-based programs and don't need you to submit all that paperwork again. Great thing to be able to do when you can do it. Creating avenues like the Community Advisory Board, where people are able to have two-way communication with you. So it's not just us going out and talking to people, but they're able to talk back to us and tell us, what they're experiencing on the ground. And the language access issue, just to emphasize that one again. So those are some solutions to getting towards more equitable program implementation. Let's not accept the status quo that like, oh, there's a bunch of people who are going to get left behind in this energy transition, I guess, and they're going to be left shouldering the burdens of the gas system costs. That's a shame for them. um, we want to prevent as much of that as we possibly can. That's what I got.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Abby. I am going to stop sharing here so we can see what questions that we have. That was a great overview of, again, all the topics that we really wanted to make sure that we shared with our audience today around the principles, what we're doing programmatically to support community engagement, and what are some of our sort of lessons learned. So as I'm pulling up the Q&A box, it looks like we do have a couple of things submitted. I wanted to ask a couple of things. What's something that you have learned from your community engagement efforts about electrification or GHHI's work in general that has surprised you from the experiences you've had in speaking with and connecting with community members?
Mm. um, I sort of alluded to this, but the hard feelings that can be created and really last when people feel like they were given false hope about something that's so important to them. I did not anticipate sort of the strength of that, and that's why we're working so hard to course correct in that way. We want to get people in the door, right? And we want to talk about all the great things we've done and share success stories and show them all the things that they could get so that we get them in. But if you do that in like too vehemently positive of a way, yeah, you'll be making people have expectations that there's no guarantee that you can meet. And I was at a community meeting once, and I started out by saying, like, has anybody heard of GHHI? And a woman raised her hand. And I said, oh, and she was like, it was terrible, you know? And that's not what you want.
Right, right.
And I've heard many, many people, of course, say that they've had wonderful experiences. But so
But
that, yeah, that's one thing.
to your point, I think it's just it is important to create spaces for people to, talk about their experience, good, bad, and otherwise. And it's always learning, there's always learning potential for all of that, I think, for any organization. So I think it does take a little bravery and a little mutual trust to set that up, but it's really important to create that engagement. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to turn to our Q&A box. I don't know, I may be able to help on this question, but our first one is about funding sources for appliance purchases, and that some funding sources restrict or limit the ability to utilize funding for appliance purchases. How have others addressed this issue, ensuring that clients are not without appliances for any period of time after electrification? So I know we do incorporate funding sources that can cover the cost of appliance purchase and installation. I don't know if you have any details on that, but I have a couple of things I can share from kind of general experience if you don't. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not my area.
Yeah, all good. I would just say that, yeah, I know some of the utility funded energy efficiency programs will allow for appliance purchases. There are also opportunities to partner in many communities with the local LIHEAP program, the Low Income Heating and Energy Assistance Program. That covers the cost of, or it covers utility bills for people who qualify for that program, but also a certain percentage of that program can be used for appliance replacement. And that's also a potential purchase for weatherization assistance programs. So this is from an anonymous attendee. If you have a specific situation that you're looking for help with in your community, if you want to message us, I'll share my email before we close out, and you're welcome to message me about that. And we'll see if we can help troubleshoot. So our next one is fantastic presentation. Could you please say more about how you might have adapted your approach to community engagement if you were focusing on multifamily buildings, and what you may be, thinking? I don't know if you have any experience there, but yeah.
Not direct experience, but I've seen some of our partner organizations out there doing that work. And it seems like there's often a sort of champion in the building, somebody who's like, well, I'm going to go and complain about this problem. I'm not afraid to talk to the landlord, and that person can organize and bring along others. Um, the program that I'm thinking of, Action in Montgomery, really wonderful. They're the ones doing that kitchen testing, and it's almost always they're working in large multifamily buildings. They're also working with largely immigrant communities, and um, I felt so foolish after I got the answer to my question because it was so obvious. But I asked the woman who runs that program once, like, how do you, communicate with those communities? Like, what is your method for that? And she said, we hire an organizer from that community. I said, oh, that makes so much sense.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, obviously. That's great. So yeah, thank you for that perspective and example. And it looks like we have another couple of questions about appliance purchasing. So again, I'll follow up with you directly. And Colin Choney, who spoke with us last week, may be able to give us some insights on some bulk purchasing that you're asking about. So that is from Miss Lisa Marshall. I'm just going to make a note and we can follow up with you about that. But thank you for sharing those questions. And but I will share one of her comments. She said, Abby is an organizer who's done direct community support for electrification. I think Abby's takeaways and key recommendations are spot on and bravo. So thank you for sharing that feedback. We really appreciate everyone. We wanted this to be a space to talk about sort of mutual experiences. So appreciate that feedback.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I'll just respond to one of the things that I'm seeing in your other comment. Yes, it's certainly possible to just replace a stove or just replace a water heater. There may be barriers, again, with the wiring or the electrical panel and whatnot, but one of the other nonprofits in our area, Civic Works, they're doing, sort of just stove replacements right now and having a lot of success with that. And you asked also about stove hoods to vent pollutants out. Apparently, they're just not very effective. It's not that they do nothing. I like religiously turn on the fan above my stove now when I use it, hoping
Right.
to electrify soon. But they don't do what you would hope that they do in cases.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So our next question, it looks like, is about some of the I guess pre-electrification repairs. If you can speak to enabling measures for electrification and ways in which those preliminary repairs have been facilitated. So I mean, if you maybe can walk through, Abby, a little bit of what you know about the comprehensive assessment process that we're doing in the units that we're receiving electrification services, we can share some insight on that.
So yeah, again, not really my area. But what I understand and what I relate to people is that we have an assessor who's trained to look holistically at the home, come out and look at everything that we might possibly be able to deal with. So lead paints, asthma triggers within the home, trip and fall hazards, wiring issues or other hazards, other types of contaminants, structural issues, again, which we may or may not be able to deal with. And we always encourage people to walk through the home with the assessor so that if there's anything that they know is an issue or that they're concerned about specifically, they can point it out. And we create a workup of like everything going on that could be correctable. And then we match it to what funding sources we're able to access for that household and what we could do for them. Ways in which preliminary repairs have been facilitated. I'm less sure how to answer that one. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's what I've got there.
that's great. And I will say, that Colin Choney walked through our process for how the Baltimore Whole House program works in session 3. We have that recording, so we have that available to access for you if you want sort of that programmatic case study. And he also shared a household case study of how the process works from the initial comprehensive environmental health assessment and energy audit to developing scopes of work and getting that work completed. So if you want some more information on that, we have that recording to share, and we'll share it via email. But related to that, Abby, one of the things I wanted to ask you is really about GHHI's team approach. And do you have a way in which you can, as you're connecting with people, maybe introducing them to the applications, then sort of do a handoff to other people on staff so they can follow up? Will you talk about that a little bit more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we have 2 client intake specialists on staff. And sometimes I just give people their number directly, or I say, call our main office and ask to speak to intake. And I tell people that's the fastest way to get services, right? Because you could fill out an online form that we have and have somebody call you back, or you could call us and hopefully just speak to somebody right then and there. And if not, try back in an hour. And if they were talking to somebody else or out at lunch, maybe they'll be able to get you then.
Mhm.
So yeah, we've got a robust team. We have outreach and education staff who can come out and do presentations if I'm not able to cover a specific event. We have a family advocacy services team that can handle education about asthma triggers in the home. So I rely on them to get the best information and handouts to give people, and who can also help people in some cases walk through issues, or like I'm dealing with a lead problem. What is the landlord actually responsible for here? They can help walk them through what the relevant laws are. So yeah, great team.
Awesome. And do we have multilingual staff members, or do we work with any community partners who speak languages other than English to get word out?
Yeah, so I don't have a full like spreadsheet of what languages everybody might be able to speak. That would be a great thing to have. Now that I think about it, but we do have at least three staff members I know of who are fluent in Spanish, and been putting together a little list of people who'd be interested in classes. Um, Obviously, Spanish is not the only language out there that people might need help with. So I understand that we're working on developing a relationship with a language service, where we could, sort of hook people up with interpretation on an ad hoc basis. But yes, so for this electrification community advisory board, we worked with a company that provides translation services. We made sure we had the promotional materials and the application and the web page explaining everything available in Spanish.
Hmm.
Um, and we did get one person who submitted the Spanish language application. So I'm going to ask one of my coworkers who speaks Spanish to call that person and do the screening interview. And if we end up selecting them for the board, then we'll have to pay translators to come in. CASA, which is a really great immigrant advocacy organization here in our area. They were kind enough to provide me a list of interpreters and translators that they use. So now I've got people's names and contact info and their rates. So that's very helpful. And when I've been going out and speaking to primarily Spanish speaking groups, uh, the staff of those organizations have been kind enough to translate for me. And uh, obviously, we are going to need to pay people to do that when we're hosting meetings. But when they're hosting the meeting, when I came out and spoke to to CASA's membership, their monthly meeting about the Electrification Community Advisory Board, one of their staff members stood there with me and did the translation.
Oh, that's awesome. Excellent. Well, I think we have responded to our Q&A submissions thus far. I'm going to follow up with a few of the submissions via email so we can make sure that you get information about the technologies you're asking about. But thank you for sharing all of your questions and comments, everyone. We just have a couple minutes left, Abby, so I thought I would just maybe ask if there's anything else you want to close out and sharing with everyone.
Yeah. I had a couple more bullet points that I was like, I should keep this to 2 slides, but in terms of general principles. So I was kind of hoping there might be a moment to speak
Great.
to those. Be aware of your positionality, is the language that my colleague Shadia gave me when we were talking about this list. So, don't be ashamed of it if you happen to have been born into a race or a gender or a class, where you in the hierarchies that exist in our society have more power than somebody else. That's not like you didn't do anything wrong, but be aware of it, and sensitive to it, and be authentic, and don't, like pretend that that's not the case. Be willing to share about your background, and give people a sense of who you are. Set boundaries. when needed. When you're working in community, you're going to encounter people who are struggling with things you're not able to help with, who, will ask you for things that you just aren't able to provide, or ask with an insistence and frequency that is not appropriate, and you need to be able to know when to say no. I'm sorry, I'm cutting this off. And that's a tough thing to figure it out, but you gotta be ready to be thinking about it. And seek out people who are already doing the work. It's very rare that a new program is meeting a need that no one else in any way was touching previously. And rather than thinking of those people as competitors, proactively seeking them out and talking to them, making sure you understand what they do, any synergies, at the at the least, they won't be able to say like, well, they never reached out to me, I'm so offended. And at best, you'll have a new partner.
That's great.
So that's what I got.
That's amazing. Abby, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and information. We look forward to following up with everyone via email to share out these resources with you in our series wrap up. So again, thanks everyone for joining us, and Abby for your time. We really appreciate learning about all the great work you're doing, and keep it up. Um,
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to the audience and your great questions and comments. Appreciate it.
Everybody, and hope everyone has a great rest of their week. All right, take care, everyone.